Hello everyone. Sorry that we're having to improvise a little bit today. My family is on vacation in Phuket, Thailand, and we got here last night and checked the internet this morning and it's very slow. So I think to avoid everybody the frustration of me not being able to get the VC to work properly, we're going to have a substitute VC. So what I'll go ahead and do is go through the PowerPoint, which we would have discussed in the VC, and I'll attach that for you. And then I think I will go ahead and post some questions in the discussion forum so that we can continue the conversation as though we were all together in the VC. So sorry again, and hopefully everybody is able to get this communication from me. I will send you personal emails as well to let you know about the problem we're having. And I might still, I would love it for everyone to still attempt to get on for the VC, so I will still try to be in there. But more than likely, I don't think it's going to let me host an actual class. It's moving too slow to let me do much within the VC. So apologies. Anyway, so we are on Unit 3 of Module 2, Diversity, and the activities for this week are a voice thread, which we'll be working with a partner on. Diversity and differentiated instruction is what that one will cover, and a reflection on the role of special education in tomorrow's world, and a report of interviews, a special education referral process. We'll spend a little bit more time talking about these activities at the end, and a mind map of the remediation process. Go ahead and give yourself quite a bit of time for this week's activities, and fortunately the mind map, I believe, is a new process for maybe a lot of you, and it can be a bit time consuming, but I believe once you get the hang of it, it is a fun tool to use, and one maybe that your classrooms would find useful in the future. Okay, so Carol Tomlinson is somewhat of a bigwig in the differentiation world, and she's written many books and does a lot of conferences for teachers on differentiating. And basically her quote is, "The idea of differentiating instruction is an approach to teaching that advocates active planning for and attention to student differences in classrooms in the context of high quality curriculums." A lot of the times it's easy to think that differentiation is a new concept, but when you think about your actual classrooms, maybe in the classrooms that you were in as a student, a lot of that it's been done. It's things like maybe splitting the kids into groups that helps support them better, or choosing maybe locations of the classroom that fit their needs the best. Those are some of the basic ways to differentiate a classroom. We're going to dive in a little bit to more of how you can differentiate the content and the product that maybe you're going to receive from students. But the basic idea is that differentiation is being proactive instead of reactive within your classroom. You want to be the one that leads the flow of your classroom instead of responding to what happens in the classroom. So some of the key elements of effective differentiated instruction and ways to differentiate according to teachers can be through content, which is how you're giving the information to your students. Is it a lecture form? Are you showing them a video? Are they, obviously they're going to get some sort of instruction from you, but maybe they're doing some of the research on their own. That would be how you're providing content. The process, how students make sense of the information learned. So what was the process in learning? Did they take notes? Did they do some research? Did they, was it a hands-on activity that helped them to understand the information that you just taught them? And then the product, the result of what the students have learned and how they show it. So that would look like maybe their submission to you. What are you going to actually be able to evaluate that determines whether they learned what you had taught? And then finally, another way that you can differentiate would be the effect and environment, climate or tone of a classroom. and you can change that to meet the needs of specific students and their needs, and just making it a safe place to allow for differentiated learning, because kids are aware of everyone getting different privileges or different assignments or just alternative forms of learning. They all know that everyone can have that, but if it's only a set group of students, it becomes very noticeable and very awkward. But if you choose to do it with your whole classroom, it's a much more inviting environment, and they're more accepting of that concept. So you're looking for principles of, again, an environment that encourages and supports learning, quality curriculum, and assessment that informs teaching and learning. So you want to find a way that you can track what your students have learned, instruction that responds to student variance, and leading students in managing routines. So again, being proactive with your classroom and not reactive. So again, here we have the key elements: the content, the process, the product, and the effect and environment. Now, according to the students, this previous one was according to the teachers and how they can differentiate. And now, according to the students, you could have students that are in just different levels of differentiated instruction. So you might be looking at a student's readiness. Maybe you're going to group your students by how prepared they are with certain goals that you're currently working on. Maybe you're going to group them by their interests. You're looking at their passions, the things that motivate them, and they're choosing an activity related to something they're interested in. And lastly, maybe you will take an approach to looking at how they learn. Do they like to use their hands? Do they like to read the material? Do they like to listen? And then through that, and a variety of instructional strategies, such as the ones listed below, you are differentiating your classroom. Some of the activities listed below, you will come across that information this week. You'll learn what it looks like to have a tiered assignment or a scaffolded reading and writing, learning contracts, and tic-tac-toe. Tic-tac-toe you might be more familiar with. It's something pretty popular. It is basically maybe a sheet or a board within the classroom, or a worksheet, and it has 9 squares, and each square has a different option of a project that meets your standard. But the kids, the students, feel like they are choosing their own interest or their own level of activities by forming a tic-tac-toe on the board. So they basically get to choose any 3 of their projects. However, you are still being proactive because you've chosen all 9 to fill the blocks. You're differentiating because each student can choose their own 3. It's a really helpful way to get just really good quality activities, really good response from students, because they're choosing their project. And there's a lot more interest in that when you are personally invested in a project as a student. I think we can all agree to that. Okay. So just different types. Again, sometimes it's easy to think of differentiation as maybe only involving special needs, those kids that need a lower level of service, and that's not always the case. We can differentiate because of the gender, ethnicity, the social economic class, maybe from where they're located, so we're looking at their culture or their religion. And I think it's good to be mindful of whether we're differentiating inappropriately and whether we're segregating because of these things, but also to be aware of that each child comes with all of these different puzzle pieces to form their identity, and that all of those need to be taken into consideration before you provide some grouping. Okay, so this is a graph that just displays the different services that might be happening in a school for children ages 3 to 21 served under the IDEA for children with disabilities. And you can see that the specific learning disabilities is the highest percentage of students serviced in the school year. And again, this was a few years ago, but probably still fairly consistent, with speech and language impairments in second place. So the IDEA is an act that protects and provides education for children with disabilities. It holds districts and schools accountable for making sure all students are given free and appropriate education. and it became a requirement that research-based interventions must be used when determining an eligibility for students with disabilities. And one of the most adopted formats for that is response to intervention, RTI, which we'll touch on a little bit. So you can see, teaching students with disabilities, you have to give them a free and appropriate public education, which is the least restrictive environment. Could be inclusion or could be mainstreaming. Those are the different locations where students with disabilities might be serviced. This might look like an IEP. It might look like a response to intervention plan, RTI. And every school kind of determines what process they'll use, but for the most part it needs to be at least following the IDEA. We'll come back to some of these questions in the discussion forum. So you can see response to intervention is a tiered system. It's a multi-tiered approach that provides services and interventions to students struggling, provided at increasing levels of intensity based on progress monitoring and data analysis. It can also lead to earlier identification of disabilities, reduce the number of kids misidentified, limit academic failure, and increase accuracy of special ed evaluations. If you look at Tier 1, it's the biggest tier. It includes all students. It's a universal screening and a core instruction. All of your students should be receiving this sort of support. This might be where you move them to the front of the classroom because that's the most helpful spot, or where you repeat directions twice because all students would benefit from that. Tier 2, targeted group intervention. Students are at risk for getting quite a bit behind. This is when you start to see a child that's not keeping up and you've got some questions. You're starting to maybe do a little bit of research and you're doing some screening measures to determine maybe why the student's not keeping up. And you're slowly performing some interventions, maybe having a small bit of pull-out. In Tier 3, students lag behind their peers by 1 or more years. They demonstrate very weak progress on screening measures. They're below grade level, and you will need to provide some intensive intervention and usually work very closely with a special ed teacher. You're going to spend some time looking at some case studies. They're available on this week's activity assignments and the resources page. Go ahead and read through those. You'll need to be familiar with a case study because you're going to be expected to include some in a project, and the concept of including the student's background and their history with their education and their current abilities, those are all part of a case study, so become familiar with those. Again, we will come back to these questions within the discussion forum, but we're going to be talking about ways that you could differentiate your class for students reading at the different levels, and I'd like to hear or read at this point everyone's different view of maybe how they would differentiate for these three different groups of kiddos. And that takes us to the end of the actual PowerPoint. We'll go ahead and take a quick glance at the activities that are coming up for this week. Again, the voice thread is your partner activity. The next slide will show who you will be working with, and I will set that up on the platform. So then when you go to submit, only one of you is the leader and one of you will be able to submit the project. With the voice thread, it's important that one of you creates the voice thread with the information that needs to be on it, and then the other partner can go back and comment on the voice thread, providing some additional information so that each of your voices are on each slide. I think the best bet is for one of you to create the account and share the password with the other person. You can see that you're going to collaborate and report on the role of a special education in tomorrow's learning world. And then again, you're going to need to interview a counselor and a special education teacher. There's 2 different interviews that need to be done. It's a clinical activity. We suggest that if you already know where you're planning to do your clinicals, that you use that school. If you don't know, you can get creative and maybe consider previous colleagues or previous employers maybe that would have that information, and you could contact them via phone or email. Some inclusion of maybe your voice conversation or your Skype conversation would be a good addition to the activity. And lastly, a mind map of the remediation process, just the process that might be taken when you find a student that's going to need extra support. I'm going to quickly go to the next slide because I'm on a timer and I get 15 minutes. Here are the partners for this week. So again, the person with the star is the team leader and will be responsible for the final submission of the voice thread this week. All right, we're all set. Thank you again. Have a great week, and I will post questions to the discussion forum. Bye.